I'm Isaiah with iTech Pro, and today we're going to go over an iPhone 12 Pro Max, which is essentially a parts board, but I wanted to go ahead and separate it, talk about a different preheaters that I prefer, what I'm currently using, and what I recommend. During this process, we're just going to separate the board, talk a little bit about the temperatures as far as the separation, prepping baseband, removing it, reballing it, and setting the chip back down. And at the very end, we're just going to put it in an eye socket and just make sure we still have IMEI and modem firmware. So let's just dive into this repair. And if you're new to this channel, definitely like and subscribe. I plan to see you guys coming back for new content, as I plan on releasing new content, at least one video a week. So hold me to that, and then I'll keep bringing you guys some awesome content. So essentially what you want to do is just go ahead and get rid of this little sticky pad. The reason why is a good idea to get rid of it is because it just retains a lot of heat. So during the process of us putting it inside of the preheater and trying to separate the board, it may prolong the time that it actually takes for the board to split. So you could try with a little bit of alcohol. Typically what I do is just go ahead and get a little bit of hot air. For the purpose of this video, I can just speed this up. And we just go ahead and remove this bottom sticker. Now, depending on the preheater that you're going to be using, essentially you don't have to remove the antenna. I prefer not to remove the antenna because it just becomes a pain in the neck. We'll do the same for these little sticky pads that are around the FPC connector. If you don't remove it, this will just melt and it just becomes a mess. It's really difficult to remove if it's in the state of where it's like just melted. Could use a little bit of air. Let's heat it up a little bit. Just put a little bit of alcohol. And we can take it away. All right, we're gonna go ahead and throw this on the preheater. So I used to use Meijing CH5. It was great while I used it. The only downside with it would just take too long. It would take very, very, very long for the board to separate. We're talking almost 9 to 10 minutes, and sometimes that can cause issue. I don't believe a board at 220 to 230 Celsius is supposed to be on the preheater for 9 to 10 minutes. That's just my personal opinion. Second best that I've tried is going to be the Sunshine. Sunshine seems to separate faster than the Meijing CH5, but you know, your mileage may vary. So this seems to be more temperature accurate than the CH5. It could just be my units. This is just from my personal experience. Today we're going to be using the WLHT007, and it's essentially a preheater that is designed. I think it was originally designed to remove like the bottom of the board, the bottom of the interposer, like the very, very bottom of it. That's what people say, but I'm not 1000% sure. But anyways, this preheater here, as you can see, it's designed to only heat up the perimeter of the interposer. That creates less risk when it comes to separating the board, and the time difference is night and day. I mean, I could probably do this in 3 minutes, and 3 to 4 minutes I can separate 12 Pro Max. So let's go ahead and put this inside of here. It's a little harder for the 12 and 12 Pro series to tuck away the antenna. Sometimes I have to take the antenna off on the 12 series. On the 12 Pro Max, we could actually get this in here if you tuck the cable and turn it. you don't have to take the cable off. So we'll go ahead and put this in here, tuck that in, push down, and that's nice and flush. So that is perfect right there, where we can tuck off that cable towards the side. We don't have to sit there and worry about trying to resolder this cable, which is, it's a pain in the neck to resolder. But yeah, that's how it sits essentially. And we're gonna go ahead and turn this on. You're gonna watch me split it, and you're gonna see how fast it is compared to other preheaters, especially if you've worked with preheaters in this industry. Interestingly enough, on this particular main processor unit or main base unit for the WLHT007, it's a little off as far as the temperature. So if you try to split it at 230 on this particular unit, it's gonna overheat the board. But if you split the board at 190 Celsius, I haven't had any issues. That's something that we tend to do as micro solderers from time to time. When we get a new tool, it's not always the target temperature that's set for another station that's going to work with this current station. You're going to have to play around with the numbers. You may need to start from 150 Celsius and then move up 10, 15 degrees until you see that it's optimal for your workload. I have a steel block. I started using this. I saw Jesse using it, Jesse Cruz from VCC Board Repairs. It was an excellent idea. I really started to understand how the boards cool down faster with this system of it being a heat sink. So I think he originally got it from the auto repair. But anyways, this is a really good idea. The small one is okay for like smaller iPhones, but the bigger one is it works better for something that's at a higher temperature to cool it down faster. So let's see if we're up to temp. We are at 190, and let's see if it's ready. If we can go ahead and lift. Almost, not quite. It's just about there. For this process, I don't use a microscope. You can, it will help in the beginning, but once you've done this 100 times, you're not going to use a microscope. So I see the flux bubbling. Any minute now. Just turn it to the side so you guys can see it. There we are. So I like to go in with a hook from this side, hook inside, and just pick up. We'll go ahead and put this on the steel block. And we'll go ahead and lift this one up. And we can set that over to the side. We'll let that cool off. And now let's take a look at this under the microscope. All right, let's have a look. So first thing I like to do is just check for little components around big chips because that's gonna pretty much indicate if we use too much heat. Typically you would see solder balls like hanging out of or popping out of the side of baseband, which we don't see. Yeah, it looks good to me. I did have some other issues with other preheaters that took like 9 to 10 minutes to separate. This was relatively fast, so we shouldn't have any issues. Let's take a look at the top board. Back it out. Clean a little bit of this thermal paste off. So we can have a good look and a good indication. Don't see any solder balls. Everything looks fine to me. So I'm always looking for if I see any solder balls popping out of the CPU next to resistors and capacitors. I actually don't see anything that would cause me to, worry. So yeah, this is. I just want to mention as well. There with other preheaters, I knew it took too long because I would look at the PMIC, and the issue I would have with other preheaters is that essentially the coating, there's like a little wrap or paper. I'm not sure what it's called, but there's something that's this sticker this labeling that they printed on. It's engraved or etched onto a surface, not the chip itself, but this layer that's kind of stuck on top. Some certain indications that the board has overheated or has experienced high temperature is that this will start to become wrinkled. You could also tell, like sometimes if you look at this area over here on the top board, on the top side, if it looks extremely wrinkled too, that's another indicator. Because like right on top of NAND, you have this, I don't know if it's EMI shielding or stickers, but it's this pad over here. Typically, if you leave it on a preheater for too long, it just looks super wrinkled, right? So that's something that you need to look for visual aid. Especially, you kind of have to dive right into visual inspection right after you separate these high temperature boards. For the lower temperature boards, I really don't see anything to worry about as long as you're using the correct temperatures. But yeah, looks like a clean pull. We're gonna go ahead and prep this board. Okay, so before we move on to the bottom board, you never want to get ahead of yourself. The best practice is to go ahead and use some form of a DC power supply. This happens to be a mobile DC power supply. It's a DT880, although I don't use it as often because I get a lot of phones with short circuits, and it pretty much, when you hit the power button, it's going to turn off because the voltage, the device is going to be it can't consume that much amperage. So essentially it's going to cut itself off. But in this case, once we turn it on, it's set to around 4 volts, and we could do either two things. If you have parts, you can connect the power button. 3 things, I'm sorry, let me clarify. You can put this in a housing, connect the power flex, and press the power button. That's going to prompt it to boot. You're going to see the amperage go up. You can have like a part flex, maybe from Mobile Centrics or Inter Gadgets. That's just the power flex, and you can squeeze onto the power on pin from the flex, or you can short it with tweezers. Either way, those are the ways to kind of get it to boot. So we're going to go ahead and try to prompt it to boot, and we're going to look for, hopefully we're looking for a normal boot sequence. This is kind of tricky to do off of the microscope. So the power pin is over here, and I like to let go when it jumps up from 102. I didn't hold it long enough. Oh. Let's try that one more time. Let's hold it for a little bit longer. 1 1000, 2 1000, 3 1000, 4 1000, 5 1000. About 2 seconds more, let go, and that looks like a normal boot to me. It's not static or stuck on any particular number. It's going through the lower amperage to the mid-range to the high amperage. About 800 milliamps it should reach in just a second, 1.8, 1.7. Looks like a normal boot. So if we would have put a screen on here, it would boot just fine. So now that we know that our top board and our CPU and everything, the NAND and everything else is working fine, let's go ahead and move on to the bottom board. All right, so let's go ahead and prep these 2 ICs and get them off the board. Take them off and reball them back and put them back down to the board. So I'm gonna go ahead and let you know a couple things. You're going to have to program this chip right here, which is so delicate, I don't even want to touch it with a number 11 blade. This is a number 11 blade. This is a very sharp blade. It's like a surgical blade almost. This is what I use to get in between all the tight spaces. My 2 favorite tools is gonna be a 007. It's a hook, essentially. It's a really good tool to kind of go into tight spaces as well, but it's not as thin as a number 11 blade. Number 11 blade, you're gonna have to have a little bit more control because this could cut the board. You can cut traces with this. So definitely, if this is your first time doing it, practice on a donor board or something, because it's really easy to cut traces. All right, let's get into the process. So I have this on a preheater at 120 Celsius. I do use the Meijing CH5 as standalone preheater, but I do not use it to separate boards. So we'll go ahead and start removing the edge of the glue from baseband. For this number 11 blade, you kind of just have to get a feeling for it. It's all about practice and experience. So the goal here is just to loosen up the glue from the surrounding chips that you're going to be working on. And due to the fact that I have a preheater, although I'm using low temperature on my hot air, there's no need for me to have my hot air at one specific location for a very long time. If you do that, then you're going to start to overheat things, and that's not a good thing. Sometimes just because it's so hard to hold these boards, in a sense where you're just trying to get in a specific angle and the board's moving a lot like this, I like to lower down my temperature a little bit more since I'm going to have it there longer. And I like to put my nozzle on top of baseband. It actually helps the board from not moving. Just with very light pressure. You don't want to crack the chip or anything. So I'll mix it up. I'll go in with my 007 and start cleaning some of this glue. Trying to reach all the tight spaces. You can kind of feel when you get to the bottom of the board because it feels smooth. It doesn't, that jagged, rigid feeling that you get when you're scraping something goes away, and that's when you've reached essentially the mask of the board. And from there, you don't want to keep going. You don't want to keep digging in harder. So I will keep switching back and forth from the 007 to the number 11 blade. Essentially just use what works for you. So spaces are really tight, and you got kind of have to go at a higher angle. Got a capacitor right there, really close to the chip, and the underfill is really tough to get. So just keep focusing on all the perimeter of the chip you're going to be removing. Also for good practices, I remove the underfill around baseband as well. Baseband PMU, I'm sorry. This is the power management unit for baseband. This is what powers it. You don't have to go all the way to the bottom, but you want to get enough where you've loosened up the tension from the underfill. Main reason to do it is because there's less risk on the preheater, but when you're going to go, you know, it's considered a neighboring component. When you go to remove baseband, if there's another chip adjacent to it, next to it, and you don't like kind of clean the underfill, there's a certain chance that that chip may become floated, where the solder balls on the bottom of the chip will become disconnected from the chip, and the chip will no longer cease to do its function properly. That can cause things like no power, especially if it causes solder bridges. It can cause a whole bunch of things. I've seen it all. So just be very patient. It's not a speeding contest. It's not a. You don't want to have to figure out, try to figure out how to do this the fastest way. Essentially, doing this, trying to be efficient, is the best, state of mind. When you're talking about soldering and delicate repairs like this, you don't want to focus on speed. It doesn't matter if you have 5 of these on your table. Still, I recommend you don't really focus on speed. I rarely offer same-day service on bottom board swaps or even baseband jobs. Something simple like a TriStar or audio IC, those are definitely repairs you can offer same day, but something like this you just want to take your time with, especially if you're new. I mean, I've got a bunch of experience, and it's still, there's still some tricky scenarios where you do this whole process, and most of the time it works, and sometimes it just doesn't. There's many reasons. Baseband CPU could be dead itself from an internal short. You got cases of water damage. I've seen cases where I've done a full bottom board swap and then there's no SIM detection and it can't read the SIM, but modem firmware and IMEI is back. So I've seen enough to just be a little bit more cautious on these repairs. So yep, just keep cleaning around all the components that we need to remove. Over here is tricky. You don't want to damage the coil. What I do is I just stay as close as I can to this Wi-Fi chip. I just hug the inner wall of it, and I try not to go too deep because I find that you really don't need to go to the bottom of most of these tight spaces. I usually end up like beating it up a little bit, like as you see right now, but it still works, trust me. All right, so I'm gonna use something that's a little rough, or stronger than the number 11 blade rather, to get this underfill off the top side of the Wi-Fi. The goal is to just try to pick at it until it loosens up. You don't want to try to remove this whole entire block of underfill with one swoop, with one swipe, because you can become impatient and aggressive and then end up scratching the board, and that would render that board useless. You would have to get another donor board for a bottom board. So just pick at it slowly. It will loosen up. It's just a matter of temperature, heat, and time. Temperature and time. Kick off the remaining to the side. It breaks up in little pieces essentially. And again, anytime I'm cleaning underfill, I'm not heavy on my wrist. I'm not trying to use a lot of force. The more you work at it, the brittle it becomes. The more brittle it becomes, and just it's easier. We're almost done with the cleaning. Santana loves getting in my way. And this is for the tight spaces to get all of this stuff off. This is good from time to time to just go ahead and rotate your board. Just being very careful as I'm working around the smaller components, taking my time. We're almost good to pull both chips. Just a few more spots. There. Now that we have removed all of the underfill that's attached to the main chips that we're going to pull, which are the baseband and Wi-Fi. We're gonna go ahead and move our temperature up and get ready to pull these chips. There's several ways I can remove this chip. The tool of choice today is going to be a 007 hook. While the board is nice and warm. I'm going to go ahead and pull these chips. Just give it a little bit of wiggle. There we go. Wi-Fi is pulled. And we go for baseband. Like going in this little corner right here, kind of pointing my air away from baseband. Baseband PMU. Just trying to get under. That's it. So we can take a look at both chips. Make sure we don't have any damage. I like to set them off to the side. Get a visual inspection of both of the chips. Now we do have to clean it, but for the most part, I don't see any damage. It didn't take awfully long. Looks fine to me. Yeah, so we'll go ahead and continue prepping this board while it's nice and warm. I like to run some medium or lower melting temperature solder on here. Let me get this focus for you guys. There we go. Turn on my fume extractor and make it a little louder. Never get comfortable in one position, always turn. Make sure we change the whole entire alloy. Over to Wi-Fi. All right, so that's good enough. set these two chips to the side so we can get ready to reball them in a minute. All right. So I may do this a little different than what you're used to seeing, but everybody has their own method, which is the beauty of this industry. You can look up 10 different people who are micro soldering, and their method is totally different. I actually admire that. It's like this is our canvas, and we're the artist. And as long as you know the fundamentals, you can kind of bend and twist things into your own logic in your own way. So with this method, I just want to let you guys know I am not using extreme pressure while I'm wicking. Just gonna add a little bit more flux. I like to dip my iron into the paste. And very lightly just go over the pads. It may seem like it, again, I'm not using a lot of pressure. I've learned that the hard way, not to use a lot of pressure. We can go ahead and clean up. And just as good as new. So go ahead and clean up the remaining edge of the surface area. We still have a little bit of some underfill left. I've always noticed that this chip always always happens to have like stuff spilling out of it, whether it's liquid or flux or just the pressure of something releasing. I've noticed that on every bottom board swap. Let me know if you guys have noticed something like that, or if it's just me. The goal, like I said, it's just not, you don't want to keep your hot air there for way too long. You just want to attack the underfill as it comes, but also be mindful that you don't have an unlimited amount of time to keep your hot air there. So a couple things to look out for, especially if you're new. Well, I see a lot of new guys send me pictures on social media because I like to help people out from time to time. They usually rub or scrub so hard with the wick that there's the brown blackish mask that's separating the distance between each pad is completely exposed. It's either copper or you see the lines that are going to this voltage line to that voltage line. They seem like they're connected. Now the problem is if you don't use like a UV solder mask, then you're going to run into other issues and bridges, lines that are bridged that are not supposed to be bridged together. So the trick to this is basically just don't use a lot of pressure and you'll be fine. It'll be extremely light on the wrist. There's also other techniques. You know, you don't have to wick. You know, you could use the ceramic tweezers and kind of brush left and right, or you can clean, you know, in between. You can clean the underfill in between the pads individually. It's whatever you're accustomed to. And some pads are oxidized, but that's an easy fix. They're not as oxidized. Only the ones like on the bottom corner over here. But typically I go back one more time and I'll wick it one more time so that I don't have to worry about it later. When the chip is ready, when I'm ready to install baseband and Wi-Fi, I don't have to worry about re-prepping the board or anything like that. Definitely you want to take this off your preheater when you're done, because I've noticed times where if you let it sit there for, I don't know, maybe 15, 20 minutes, even on 120 Celsius, you'll come back and some of these pads will be a little oxidized due to the residual heat and whatnot. So let's go ahead and wick this one more time. Going to cut a piece of wick. So you can do both chips of one side of each side at the same time. It doesn't really matter. You don't have to just focus on one chip, especially if you're prepping both of them, you know. I like to use new pieces of wick from time to time, preferably shorter pieces. We just wrap up on the other side. Let's clean this up one more time. I do see just a little bit that I'm going to actually take care of right now on the Wi-Fi side. Maybe if I turn on this, put the spotlight closer, you can see it. It's right there on the edge. It's a little bit more underfill. Just a little bit. It's the corners. Gotta be mindful of the corners as well. Even having underfill like something like, you know, hanging around the corner will give you issues. So I will clean one more time. All right, so here, not the biggest deal in the world, but this is an example. If you wick just a little bit too hard, you can have like a pad that solder mask is exposed just a little bit. Anything to this degree, I actually wouldn't worry about. Personally, that's just, if it looks like that, I wouldn't worry about it. Let's see, are there any other ones? Very lightly, I mean like extremely lightly. What it looks like that trace goes directly, it goes directly to that pad, and it's not too exposed and too close to another pad. That's fine. I don't actually solder mask things that look that light, but if it looks like a pink line, like if this line right here was completely exposed, what's going to happen is when you sit down to chip, there's a possibility instead of the two balls sitting perfectly spaced apart, it could just create like a big bridge. Now that's okay, because sometimes these lines for the most part, you can see that they go to each other. I'm looking at like a little pattern on the board. If you look at ZXW, you'll see that like this is like the internal interconnecting highway of that line, right? Whether it's a 1V8 line, whether it's a power line, an I2C line, you can kind of see where the line goes. But you can have an issue where one line doesn't go to a line next to it, and then it just creates solder bridges because like the majority of the mask is scraped off. So just be mindful with little things like that. If you just learn to check your work, you'll be fine. But yeah, board is clean. Now let's go move forward with the reballing process. So reballing is essentially a two-step process. We first have to prep the chip, and then we have to put a stencil on top and reball it. What I like to do to prep the chip is essentially use a hot stone. You don't have to use this. This just makes it way easier to deal with. So I prefer using a hot stone just because if you're just doing a bunch of these, I find that it's way faster. Okay, so let's go ahead and let's do baseband first. What I like to do is just add a little bit of flux, put baseband on there, with a little bit of flux. I'm gonna turn on my fume extractor so it may get a bit louder. Take some low melt paste. Apply some directly on the chip, just a good amount. From here, let's go over with my iron. Like to kind of get something to hold it at the same time. I'm just pretty much like hovering over it. Then I'll come back with my wick. And we'll lightly go over it. The wick is really to kind of just get rid of the underfill. The rest of the kind of getting rid of the oxidation. I tend to not really worry about that on the preheater, on this hot stone. This is really, for me, this is the key goal is just to clean the remaining glue that's on the bottom of the chip. So again, not being very hard when I'm not wicking very hard. I'm just trying to clean up all this glue. This is a good moment to clean the edge glue. So it just makes it very easy, especially if you're doing like CPUs and stuff like that. Look how that edge glue just comes off like with no effort. Rotate it from side to side. Let me get it a little clearer for you guys right there. So again, just removing all the edge glue. Just rotate it and remove it. It's really important to remove this edge glue because if you just kind of leave it on there, it becomes an issue of as far as alignment and sitting the chip down properly. You can reflow this thing into place many times, but if you have edge glue remaining, it's not going to sit flush. because it's gonna sometimes just gonna sit on top of components on the corner. All right, so we're good with the hot stone preheater. I'm gonna get it off of here, and we're gonna do the same for Wi-Fi. Let's put our Wi-Fi on there real quick. And then let's go ahead and clean the remaining glue that's on here. So when I go over with a like an iron or something, I like to use like a low density iron. I'm not using high temperatures on my soldering station, just because it's already on a preheater. So you don't really want to give it too much heat. I find that too much heat tends to disrupt the surface of the chip. So I'm okay with it being like that. It's not that much edge glue on this, but I will try to get rid of some that I see actually over here. And there's definitely some left over here. Really easy to come off. All right, now that we've got pretty much the majority of the glue off, let's get this chip off this heater. And then what I like to do is just place both chips down. From here, I'll have to do baseband first, but this is kind of how I finish prepping the chip right here. So let's go ahead and finish prepping this chip. I don't even clean it at this point because I'm just gonna add a little bit more flux and add a little bit more low melt to the tip of my iron in conjunction with a wick. I have two pieces of wick. One is like really thin and the other one is thicker. I feel like the thicker one is a little bit more abrasive. It gets the job done. So I've got a little bit of low melt on my tip. We can just go ahead and place it down. Scrub, 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 very lightly. Kind of trying to hold the chip. The ones that are extremely oxidized, I wouldn't focus too much time on them, as you can scratch them off individually, especially if it's just like 3, 4, or 5 of them. If you sit here and try to scrape this thing and keep scratching the surface, you're gonna run into issues. So we've just got a few that are oxidized, not too bad. I'm gonna clean this chip up. Let's get some, hold the chip. Wi-Fi is pretty simple because it's not that much edge glue on not that much glue on the Wi-Fi, surprisingly. Add a little flux. Same method. I can take this other side of the wick. pretty much done. Voila. I'm gonna wick it just one more time, just because I like the pads to be completely flat. But this is gonna be just a quick pass. Go. All right, now that we got those two ready and prepped, I'm gonna just take one more peek at a baseband, because I know we were left with some oxidized pads. What we can do from here is just try to go over, I'm gonna go over it one more time with a little bit of paste. You can actually just go back individually and scratch it, like, you know, tweezers or something. So there is a method of going in here and scratching each individual pad with tweezers, with just a sharp tool. You can kind of get rid of the oxidation like this, going one by one. But I'm going to go over it one more time. So yeah, these are the ones that are like really oxidized. So I am gonna go ahead and grab a number 11 blade and go over each pad one by one. If they don't come off the second time, I don't continue to sit here and wick and wick and wick. I'd rather just get them off one by one. It's not that many pads. So I should say I'd rather get the oxidation off one by one by one. All right. Let me grab my number 11 blade. go over each and every individual one that we need to. So there's some right here towards the corner. Some of these dark ones, you can just scratch very lightly. Just a few more on the other side. Starting from this corner. In the very beginning, when I started working on basebands on like iPhone 7, and I would deal with oxidized pads such as these, I would just go over and over and over with an iron or go over with a wick. And I used to, when I was new to the industry, I wouldn't say destroying baseband, but definitely making it very hard to reball. I didn't break any pads or anything like that, but this green mass that you see was completely exposed. I ended up fixing the one that I ended up doing that one to, but it just took me like an hour to place soldered mask onto the surface of the IC, and it's a very long process. So definitely be careful when you're prepping these. When you're prepping baseband or any kind of IC that's paired that you just can't, that you just can't replace. If this happens on something like TriStar or something that's, that you can swap, I wouldn't worry about it too much. But CPUs, Logic EEPROM, Baseband EEPROM, NAND, and a couple other sensitive ICs and components, they're paired to the logic board. They're paired to the CPU or to the EEPROM by encryption. So just about done. We've got like a few more pads, about 5 more. Not a big deal. Definitely take the time to just do this, go through this. You're gonna go through certain things where you just have to develop patience in this industry and doing this type of work. There's definitely a bunch of shortcuts to repair procedures and or whatnot, but as I keep stating, this is like more of a delicate job. This comes into your shop. This is one of the repairs where you have to really understand, like, you kind of have just one chance. This isn't a job where you can mess it up and then send it off to another shop and think that they're going to be able to save you. All right, so we have Wi-Fi and baseband prep. I'm going to go ahead and grab some 183 solder paste and a stencil, like the fold like a bounty paper towel. I like to fold it and kind of keep it in the middle. So I'm going to be using my ceramic tweezers, stencil, and let's go ahead and line up the BGA chip. I'll get this lined up for you guys and then push this further down. There we go. There it is. This has more of like a sand type of mixture. All right. Let's go ahead and grab a piece of cloth. I'm actually going to grab a wipe real quick. Holding everything in position. Lightly go over with the wipe. This helps, like again, it helps get rid of the excess. And then we're gonna go ahead and reflow it back into place, or reball it rather. So another thing is, don't push down too hard. If you push down too hard, then you tend to have that issue too, where it's bulging out in the middle. So just keep your wrist relaxed, not too much pressure. Circle, circle, circles. This is a smaller stencil, so it bends really fast. It doesn't take that much heat. That's why you guys have to really saturate it. Alright, now that I've got the stencil nice and toasty, nice and preheated, going from one corner. There we go, keep preheating it. This corner. And from a distance. Almost done. Just be patient. There we go. So what I like to do in most cases, just wait for it to cool off. Usually takes about another 5 seconds. And we'll go ahead and take a look at this nice and close. And we're just going to reflow this. But before reflowing it, we'll have a close-up look. Yeah. Looks good to me. There's like one or two that when I poked them out of the stencil, they kind of moved over a little bit or kind of caved in. But once we add some flux and go ahead and reflow this sucker, it's gonna be looking perfect. So just a little bit of flux. Let's give this a reflow. Just realizing I had all that stuff in the way. Sorry guys. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and give this a reflow. Make sure the flux goes everywhere. You can tilt the chip, gravity's going to do its job. And from here, essentially, just give it a reflow. So this ensures that the balls move back to their original position. And let's have a look. So let's clean this off. It's actually, you guys are gonna get a better look. In the microscope, I get a better look than what you're seeing there, but I'm gonna clean this off so we could all take a look at it. Show you things to kind of look for. So I essentially just hold it, clean this off. That went flying. It's right here. Sorry, let me load down my PSIs. Okay. So let's have a look. Let's see what's going on. All right, so not bad. Let's take a look. Let's zoom in. So what I look for is to make sure that all the balls are generally the same height, shape, and size. So I'm gonna go ahead and focus in really close. Let's try to get really close so you can really take a look at these. So yeah, everything is more or less the same size. I wouldn't worry about, like, I pretty much on all basebands, when I go in with a 007, I kind of scratch the surface of the bottom of the mask, but I've never gone deeper than this. Typically, any pry tool you use, you're gonna have some type of sign, depending on the chip. Some kind of sign of entry. I know CPUs are definitely way more delicate. They're kind of going with a flat blade, non-sharp blade. It's kind of like a little mini spatula. Kind of go in there and lift up, preventing any damage on the surface. So baseband looks good. Let's go ahead and set that to the side, and let's go ahead and reball Wi-Fi. I did forget to mention we do have to take the NFC off. In my personal experience, if you do not take off NFC, Apple Pay will not work. This is confirmed on the 12 Pro Max. Okay. This is a relatively easy chip to reball. So let's get Wi-Fi under here and ready for a reball. Just line this up. Push down with my chip so it creates a print on the napkin. That way when I'm pushing it left, there we go. So it's a better feeling right there. Okay, Still have some paste remaining from when we did baseband, so we'll just continue using that same paste. You don't really need a lot of paste for multiple chips. Let's wipe this very lightly. Let's see if we can even that out. Ceramic tweezers. I use a little bit of extra pressure when I'm lifting my fingers, but after that, I kind of just lighten up on my wrist. So I don't know if it's even. I'm gonna have to hold it. There we go. That's Wi-Fi. All right, let's get the chew out of there. Get it while it's a little toasty. Okay, let's go with a quick reflow. Has plenty of flux on it. All right, that's reflowed. So Wi-Fi, baseband's ready. Let's go ahead and grab NFC. So let's go ahead and grab you, my friend. Where are you? You are right here. So we'll grab this NFC chip so we can reball it, and we're gonna essentially what we're doing with this board. We're going over the 12 Pro Max, how to prep the bottom board, and how to essentially just reball and put everything back down. So after we lift up the NFC and reball it, we're going to put it back down. We're going to essentially, from there, we're going to essentially just go to 3U Tools and make sure we have IMEI, motor firmware, and whatnot. So, yeah, let's go ahead and take this chip off. For this, I don't really need a preheater. Just add a little bit of flux. Orientation. It's kind of hard to see that chip sometimes. Let me turn that light off and just put my spotlight on for a second. Definitely need a polarizing lens. Okay, I see that the dot is at the top right. Okay. So something that would be on the top right. You don't have to scratch the board. You can scratch like the top of a capacitor a little bit, or even like, yeah, sometimes you can, I can see light scratches on a capacitor. Like on the metal surface right there. You'll notice if you look at it really hard, you could see like where I scratched. It's a really light scratch to give you an indication. So let's go ahead and get rid of this alcohol. Just a little bit of flux. Let's go ahead and pull this NFC. Okay. Alright, now that we got that chip off, let's go ahead and clean it. Essentially, we're going to be reballing this NFC. Okay. This chip is it's replaceable, but like I said before, you'll lose Apple Pay functionality if you replace it. All right, so let's go ahead and reball this for the sake of prepping the board. Let's go ahead and find a cutout for my stencil for the NFC. Alright, let's see which one fits. So we have pretty much very simple. When you're looking at your stencil, you want to make sure you have the appropriate amount of space for the chip. So move a row to the right, or move a row up, and move a row down. This is the appropriate chip. Appropriate stencil for the chip. We can try that again. So we're gonna lift up, gonna move a row to the left, move a row to the right, move a row up, and move a row down. That's essentially the way that I like to confirm. Hit me up in the comments if you've ever reballed the chip and you left the whole entire row exposed. I know I'm not the only one. Okay, so I should still have a little bit of paste left over. So there you go. Still have paste left over from baseband and Wi-Fi. So you don't need a bunch of paste. So with just the right amount, you could do 3 or 4 or 5 ICs. So let's go ahead and flow this into place, reball it, and then we'll go over EEPROM programming for a baseband. Alright, we're good to go there. Just wait one more second and we can lift up and take it out of the stencil. You don't want to leave it there all day and you're dealing with dry flux. Come on, work with me, get out. So sometimes I like to just push on the chip. Alright. Give it a little reflow. Everything looks perfect there. Sometimes there's no need to add like flux for a reflow when you still have plenty of flux left. So we'll go ahead and set this to the side. So essentially at this point we have our baseband reballed. We have our baseband, zoom out so you guys can see. Baseband, Wi-Fi, and NFC. So these are essentially the components you're going to need for the bottom board to transfer to another good known bottom board. These are all the three that you're going to need right here. So as long as you have those three and you're successfully able to get them off the board without damaging the chips, you can proceed with this next step. This will be we will be covering programming the EEPROM data, for baseband, specifically baseband. There's different types of EEPROM data. There's logic EEPROM, and then there's that's for I think data encryption, and then baseband EEPROM is for the baseband CPU itself. And that's how it handles encryption with I guess all of its functions and everything that has to do with IMEI. I know there's definitely some encryption behind that because it's not really easy to just change your IMEI on an iPhone and still activate it. I'm pretty sure when if there's a will, there's a way. But anyways, we have those three prepped, and let's go ahead and take a look at the process of programming the baseband EEPROM. Here we have the EEPROM programmer for the X through 12 series. I believe its only other function is the iPhone 10 logic EEPROM you could actually program. But other than that, it's just X through 12 series. So really simple. You just plug in a lightning cord. Main key, you have to do this with baseband off the board. You can't have baseband installed, so of course remove it. And go ahead and plug this in. It turns on like so. Turns on like so. And you should see, let's put it this way so you guys can read it. You should see where it shows the menu screen. So essentially we're just gonna sit this down on the slot for the 12 Pro Max, and that's indicated 12 p.m. And move this antenna over just a little bit and sit it down. So we're gonna click OK to continue first. So let's hit OK. And once we push down, it should change from no chip detected to, I believe, 12 series. So yeah, 12 series BB chip. So at this point, all you would essentially do is read the underlying data. So read, and read is complete. And from here, you just write it. So you would take another bottom board and you would plug it in. Let me get this lined up. You plug it in and you would just write it. So easy as 1, 2, 3. But for the purpose of this video, it's more educational. I don't have to read and write the same data to the same board. So we'll move on to the next step. All right, so now it's time to place these chips back on the board. We're gonna go ahead and start with Wi-Fi. I'm gonna add a little bit of flux. I have this currently set to a preheater on 120 Celsius. So just a little bit of flux. That's just enough right there. And let's go ahead and get Wi-Fi into place. So we'll place our Wi-Fi chip. Orientation, that dot goes on the top left. So let's flip this around. All right, let's try to line it as best as possible. So we definitely had a gap right here. And push this over ever so slightly. And that looks good right there. Okay, so we'll go ahead and get this into place. So I'll go ahead and start kind of from far at first. Board is kind of already up to temperature at 120 Celsius. You're going to see the chip move into place. When it moves into place, I like to give it a light bump. Now that it's been a few seconds already, I can get closer to the chip. It should move in place any second now. Waiting for it to shift right about now. A little bump. See how it comes back to place? That's it. So Wi-Fi is installed. Let's go for baseband. One second. Sorry about that. Wi-Fi is installed. Let's go ahead and go for baseband. I mean, it's really easy to tell where baseband goes because there's an actual cutout, or there's an empty space on the board. So as far as orientation, what you look for is the same empty space that's on the chip right there. So just one oxidized pad. That takes care of that. I'm going to go ahead and set our chip down. You also have an indicator on the bottom of the chip, a little yellow arrow to indicate where pin 1 is located. So we're just going to add a little bit of flux. Not too much. Still have a little bit of glue which I want to get rid of. That's right here. It's actually some of the old dried glue. It's actually not stuck on the actual components, but let's get all this stuff out the way. This makes life way easier. All right, now that we got that out the way, let's go ahead and let's set our baseband down. But before, let's just add a little flux. Now, I don't like to go overboard with the flux on the baseband CPU area because you don't want it to bubble up and move too much. So I typically just give it like taps, and I kind of just separate or try to saturate the flux. At the very end, if you want to give it a reflow and add a little bit more flux once the chip is in place, that's fine. But I always advise this amount of flux is fine. You want the chip to settle, and then from there you can kind of tweak it in any way you want. So we'll go ahead and line this up as best as possible. And kind of remembering the spacing. Spacing looks almost correct. It's a little bit higher on that side. Yeah, so that spacing looks pretty decent to me. I'm gonna move it over a little bit to the left because I remember the coil being a little bit closer. And that seems fine to me right there. Yep, that looks good to me. So what we're gonna go ahead and do, let's go ahead and get this in place. So again, start from a distance. We're getting moving closer now. You used to see the chip move into place. Starting to shift a little bit right there. We could add a little bit more flux. Let's go ahead and do that now. Just a little bit on the edge. A little bit on this corner. A little bit on this corner. So we've got plenty of flux. Let's go ahead and continue to flow this down into place, and we should see it settle. Although it shifted in the beginning, I have a really good eye for knowing when it's all the way in place. So just keep moving in air. And you want to give it the slightest bump. It came back to place. All right. We can let that cool off. So we'll go ahead and put it on our block over here. Pick it up. And let it cool off. So let's take a look at the spacing. Spacing looks fine to me. And let's go ahead and install our NFC chip. I cool it off and put it back on the preheater just because I just don't like the board to be at a certain temperature for too long, but looks fine. Looks like the natural spacing from before. You could kind of always remember from when you were cleaning the edge glue. If you don't see it move that much, believe it or not, that just means you have near to perfect alignment. So it is a good visual. It is good to look for that slight shift, but sometimes you don't always see it. It's not as dramatic every time. So let's just throw this one on here real quick. Our NFC. And let's go ahead and get this to its right orientation with the dots on the top right where I made a scratch at that capacitor. If you kind of lean the chip, you can kind of see it a little bit. Let's just kind of get it in here and flip it over and see where we're at. I see it already. It's on the top right. So we'll flow this chip in place. Always just try to line it up as best as you can. I like to tap in the middle to make sure I'm just not sitting on top of a capacitor or anything like that. Go ahead and move this towards the side so we can adjust. Just about. Now sometimes you may have a hard time sitting the chip where it's supposed to naturally go because the pads on the bottom it's not wicked. So in that case, what I like to do is pretty much hold the chip in place until it settles at a desired fixed position. For instance, I may just hold it like this for a couple seconds. Move it over where it needs to be. Give it a bit of hot air. Let go. And now we can put it in, float in place. It's definitely gonna move over. You're gonna see when it's gonna shift. But you start from far so the chip just doesn't fly off. And then you can get closer and closer. And that's it. It shifts into place. And if you wanted to bump it, you can just bump it. It came back to place. All right. So from here, we've got baseband installed. We've got Wi-Fi installed. We already went over the programming of the EEPROM. This is your baseband EEPROM. Earlier in the video, I told you that I didn't want to touch this chip with my number 11 blade. I was referring to the baseband EEPROM, this little delicate glass chip here. If you don't have a programmer, you can move it over. It's just a really delicate chip, and sometimes it's underfilled, like on certain series. So the underfilled one, just imagine dealing with a delicate chip that's paired to your customer's cellular radios, and then the chip breaks and you render the device useless. Wi-Fi only device, if you can get it to activate without baseband. But yeah, that's the baseband EEPROM NFC. This works in conjunction with Apple Pay. This is your Wi-Fi. This is what's going to output your 2.4 gigahertz and 5 gigahertz radios. And then this is your baseband CPU, which is responsible for modem firmware, IMEI, 4G, 5G LTE service, and whatnot. So we're gonna go over this area. We're essentially just changing the solder to a lower melting solder. That way it's easier for us to wick. I just run my iron through the whole entire interposer. And then once we change this solder, we'll go ahead and wick it. Because if you try to just go ahead and wick this high temperature solder, you're gonna have some issues. You have a bunch of oxidation and just a bunch of, you'll see that when you're trying to wick, it's just not gonna work out for you. Straightforward process, just run your solder through. And clean your tip from time to time. I like to do this part before I put it in the eye socket to verify anything, because there have been moments where I'm looking to update baseband or verify a circuit after a job was performed, and it'll come back as like unable to update baseband, and it's due to like a lot of oxidation. So we're gonna do this for the top and bottom board. So now that we got that prepped, we can just go ahead and wick this. We're going to be using the Quanly Reball jig for the 12 series. Straightforward. You put on the stencil pattern for your desired device. All right, let's go ahead and put this on and apply some paste. So we can move this around just a little bit. And we can go ahead and start applying our paste. This stencil likes to warp a little bit, but over time, I learned how to pretty much deal with it. You have to saturate the hot air, and we'll go over that in just a second. But let's go ahead and apply our paste. So this paste was it's previously dried. It's a little wet in the bottle, but if you dry it a little bit, it's way easier to work with. So you just want to get all the paste inside the holes. I always try my best to make sure I have an even amount of paste in every single hole. Okay, moving on to backside. And what you'll notice sometimes with these stencils, if you're looking you could probably see it down, but in the microscope, there's I could see that the pattern is a little offset, slightly, just a little bit, but it is enough. It's offset enough for the balls to actually fall back in place though. If you see it misaligned by like a landslide, then there's something probably wrong with your stencil. Just getting to this last corner over here. And this back side. So that should be a good even amount, but you see how it kind of moves over here? What I like to do is just push down at the very end and then just go over it one more time just to make sure we don't have any solder that's bridged underneath. As long as you push down on this model, then you should be fine while you're applying the paste on the parts that it's lifting up. It is my favorite stencil. It's hard to get away from it. This is my favorite method. There are different methods of reballing, such as just applying the paste in the stencil, lifting up, and then putting it on a preheater or using hot air. So there's many different ways to do it. So let's go ahead and put this put the top part on. I like to always take a clean room wipe at the very end as well and push down and very lightly go over the whole entire area. This assures me that everything is nice and even and we don't have too much paste, and it's also just something that I always do. So that's all the paste in every hole, and we're gonna go ahead and throw this on top. All right, so now that that's in there, This kind of pushes the area that was coming up, that was giving me problems earlier, where the stencil likes to just push up. Once you put this top cover on, it's going to push it back down, so you shouldn't have too big of an issue. So my trick with this stencil, a lot of people complain that it warps to the point where they can't reball it. You see all this empty space? Of course, the reason why you have empty space is because this is an all-in-one, and of course this is for like the 12 mini, 12 Pro, 12 Pro Max. When we're going over with our hot air, you have to really pay attention to also apply heat in the empty spaces. Empty referring to there's no board there, so naturally I know if this is your first or second time, you'll just kind of try to concentrate the heat around where the board is located, but you have to hit a lot of the empty spaces where you don't actually have a board sitting there, just to heat up the stencil evenly. All right, so let's get to it. I like to grab my preferred tweezers because in this process I'm going to be pushing down a bit in between. I'm going to be using hot air, but the part that's going to warp the most is going to be a little bit towards the middle, a little bit towards the end. So I like to use my hot air and then push down towards the corner, which kind of gives me a buffer for the pads to form without the stencil, you know, pushing or, you know, just messing up the job. So we're gonna just heat up evenly. I kind of just go in this cross pattern right here where I'm getting the whole entire stencil. Even this side where there's nothing located, you have to really get your hot air in there just to make sure the stencil's not going to warp. So we'll heat this up just for a bit longer to get this up to temp. I am using 148 148 paste. It's kind of like low temperature, medium temperature paste, if you want to call it. So we've got it to a temperature where we can start going in and trying to form the balls. So this is where I'll start moving it around. I like to start from the back side, and we will start with the process. It's definitely important just to move your air. You don't want to keep it in one spot for too long. But this type of solder this paste doesn't take awfully long to form. I'm gonna move my air up just a little bit. About 5. Here we go. And let me zoom in for you guys so you can really see. About right there. A little more saturation. And everything should start forming just about now. So we're going to start with this back corner. Just be careful, this platform gets really hot, so you're going to have to tap it really fast and kind of try to move at the same time. So we've got those balls forming. Just keep moving your air. There we go. Everything's getting up to temperature. rotate. Pushing down the stencil, just to make sure it doesn't warp. All right, moving down. Rotate. So we're just going section by section, bit by bit. Alright, this is where you gotta watch out for, where it likes to warp towards the end, but my trick for that is just, like I said, I find points on the stencil where I feel like I can push down, like right around this area right here, and I can push down firm with tweezers. I kind of use like a specific set of tweezers for this. I don't want to keep using like good tweezers, because you are going to kind of mess up your tweezers a little bit. So those balls are starting to form. We can move on to the corner. I like to push down over here on the inside. All right. You also want to make sure that under this bridge, you have like these spaces where it creates like, you know, like here and here. You want to make sure the ball is formed underneath this. Just keep moving in air. Push down. Final parts over here. Push down from here. Be very careful. Certain balls are not fully formed. A little trick, if you feel like there's an area that you don't like as far as how the balls are forming, you can add just a little bit of flux, but not too much, just a little bit, and you can go back over that area. So we'll go back over this area right here and push down against the inner wall. And that looks a million times better. So we're just left with this last part of the back end. And we are done. So we can inspect this, do another little visual inspection, and then make sure, kind of go really close. And let's take a look at all the balls. Everything looks fine here. I see everything is formed underneath. Everything looks nice and even. Yeah, so we'll go ahead. This is piping hot. I know it's really hot, but I'm just used to it. I'm gonna go ahead and take this off. I like to grab a clean room wipe with a little bit of alcohol to clean the top of the stencil. And then we're gonna take this off, and we're just gonna reflow it real quick. I like to do this fast while it's still warm. I'm going to add it. So I'm going to add some flux to the perimeter. Add a little bit of flux. Just a thin layer of flux. Now we're going to give it a quick reflow. Let's give it a quick reflow. Make sure all the balls are the same size, and they should shift ever so slightly to go back in its original pattern. There we go, all the balls are getting nice and shiny. Rotate. And during this reflow, you don't want to spend too much time. You just want to reflow as fast as you can, move your air. This is like a really quick process right here. So we'll let this cool down. As you can see, all of the balls are kind of shifted back into place where they need to be. Now you're gonna have some of these that are just missing by default. This is just the way that the board is designed. You have a couple of ground spots where just the solder doesn't like to stick to. But basically from right here, I know that's ground, They're usually yellow. Sometimes it's hard to see them because I'll go over the yellow with an iron and it'll turn like silver. But yeah, so from here, essentially I'm just verifying that all of the balls are the same size, that I'm not dealing with any discrepancies like having a important pad but the ball is like half the size or not the same size, or something that's missing that's very important. So all right, everything looks good to me. From this point on, I just go ahead and I clean it one more time because right when I put it in the preheater, I like to make sure that it's fresh flux. Typically, if you just let this sit and then by the time you go to add a little more flux on the preheater, it's like burnt flux. So we'll go ahead and clean this up real quick. Let me zoom out for this, excuse me. Just cleaning up the So essentially that's how it's going to be before I put it in the preheater. This is how it should look. Really, really nice and clean. Always double check your work as well. I like to double check it because I'm using an air compressor with high PSI, so I want to make sure like none of the balls just flew off or and everything is still intact. So that's just my method of cleaning. It's a little bit easier for me, but I see that all of the balls are joined together, are within where they need to be, and in uniformity, the same size and same shape. Okay, let's go ahead and put this on the preheater. All right, so we have this on the preheater, and we're just gonna go ahead and put some flux. I have my preheater set to about 100 Celsius because I am dealing with lower temperature solder. So I don't want my solder balls to melt, and by risking that by putting it at a higher temperature. So that gives us time to put some flux on and give the board enough time to warm up. So as we start applying some flux, you can see that it's just going to start flowing, and we're just going to put a little bit of flux. You don't need a mountain of flux for this. It's almost like the less the better. So nice thin layer. And soon we'll just finish off this back area and go ahead and put the top board on. So as long as you start off with low temperature on a preheater, you should be fine. So we've got a good amount of flux everywhere where it needs to be. Just double checking. And then we're gonna go ahead and put the top board on. So you just wanna align this as best as possible. Go ahead and put that on. So some of the areas that I look for are typically around this area, towards the backside. There's a corner where it's, if I look at it, it's just easier for me to line it up. Based off the difference between the yellow and the board, I know if I need to scoot it over just a bit to get this cord at you guys this way. But I kind of push up against the wall, the inner wall. I go towards the back, and I see if the board is hanging out or protruding. Another good reference is the little pins that poke through the board. I kind of see if that's aligned, but I can just shift it over from here. I can shift it over just a bit. And maybe from this side over here, I can shift it over as well. So we're gonna just shift it over from this side. Sometimes I even like using my hands because, I mean, at this temperature, at 100 Celsius, it's really not that bad to kind of move it around yourself. You can get a feel for when everything kind of goes back in place. Surface tension is gonna do its work. It's gonna try to, it's best to put the board back to where it needs to be. So if you have it, like, let's look at this right here. If you have it almost aligned, you shouldn't really have to worry about it. Like for instance, right here, this is a good reference. I'm gonna try to zoom in and give you guys a really good indication of what I look for as far as it being aligned or not. So you could see the bottom half of the board by the inner layer. Like, so there's a layer that's like the gold ring that's at the bottom. You don't want that. You want to make sure that this gold ring is essentially pushed to the right a little bit. And you're gonna see that space, I'm gonna offset it on purpose so you can see what I'm referring to. And if you just push it to the right a little bit, push it back, you can actually see that this is a perfect ring now. So these are things to look for as far as alignment. So if you're struggling with alignment, start looking at parts of the board where your platform has like pegs or when pegs or just any empty holes. So this looks more or less aligned for me. I kind of look at the inside corner. Yeah, that looks fine to me. So everything looks more or less aligned. So we'll go ahead and turn this preheater up. I'm gonna put it on about 185 Celsius, 185 Celsius. And you should see it drop on this camera here you should see it drop in just a moment. That's going to be the part that you're going to kind of see close. Because this is essentially a sandwich, and we do have it on top of, you know, it is aligned correctly, but when you reball it, it's typically a higher height, so it's a little higher. The BGA balls are higher, so the board is going to sit up just a little higher. But we'll give it time. This is a battle of patience. Don't touch it, don't move it, don't do anything crazy. Let it do its own job. At the very end, I do recommend giving it a slight bump, just like any IC or chip. Surface tension is going to move it away and bring it back into place. I would recommend that for if you're doing a reball. If you manage to get a clean pull, and let's say you just sit it back down, that solder to me is a little thinner than the solder as far as the balls. The balls are smaller than the balls that was just created today when we reballed this. So I noticed doing that method, trying to bump it, and it has a less amount of paste. It kind of messes up the reball. I feel like the board slides and it doesn't slide back. But during the reball process, if you can go back in the video, and if you look when I refloated, those balls are really high. They're supposed to be that way because essentially the top board is wicked, the bottom board is wicked and then reballed, so there's no longer any remaining solder on the top board. So that remaining solder on the bottom board is going to reconnect to the top board. So it's kind of like, think of the ball being like 50% is for the top and 50% is for the bottom. So that's why it looks higher than what it actually is, but it's enough to where when this reaches temperature, we can tap it and it's going to come back in place. So we're at 147, it's climbing at 146, 147, 148. So the temperature's gradually just climbing. And we're just gonna wait for this to reach temperature. I'm gonna see if I can zoom in just a little bit more so we can see the sandwich close. So that's about as far as I can zoom in. Let's see if I can get this a little sharper on this camera. All right, so we're waiting for this area right here to just essentially close. It's gonna literally go like that. So we're at 156 Celsius, 158 Celsius. Gradually just the temperature's going up and up and up and up. I didn't want to speed up this process because I actually want to show you guys how long it actually takes before the board is ready, before the two halves are joined together. So we're around 165. Approaching around 170. You can start to see it close just a little bit. And we're just really paying attention to this area over here. You can kind of almost see how it's starting to close on the other side. Yep, there it goes. It's closing. So before I bump it, before I tap it, right now it's at 171. I like for it to reach 185 fully. So we're around 175. And this back area is where I like to bump it. I don't like to bump it towards the front. So we'll go around this back area right here at this corner. Right around at this corner right here. I like to bump it and it just comes back. Just about 5 degrees more before I tap it or even bump it. So right now I'm going to give it a very small tap. I like to do it by just barely touching the edge of the board, and it's actually easier for you guys to see it at this corner. I'm going to zoom in just a little bit and show you guys how it's gonna come back into place. So this corner right here, I like to tap it ever so slightly, and see how it's coming back into place. Never tap it harder than that, just barely tap it. And that's it. That's the magic of surface tension. So I can bump it this way, it's gonna come back. I can bump it that way, it's gonna come back. I can bump it this way, it's gonna come back. If you're nervous about bumping it on the edge of the board, you could also bump it like right at the middle of a post, like a screw post, very lightly, and you can see that it's gonna bump and come back. The device is in recovery mode. We're gonna go ahead and flash it. So we go to the device tab, and just go to quick flash. Should have the software installed already, so we're gonna go ahead and flash it. Now there's two different views. There's the basic look view, as I call it, where it doesn't really tell you much information of what's going on. But there's also another view that's gonna give you more of a detailed view. So this is essentially the 3U Tools Flash. The iTunes Flash is a little bit different. But essentially, what I'm looking for is 80%. Right when we reach 80%, that's when we're going to see the notification that it's updating baseband data, sending baseband data, and as long as we don't get any errors after that next populated line of information, then we can pretty much confirm that the baseband was properly reballed and installed correctly. So we'll just speed up the video a little bit, and we'll come back at 80%. All right, so we've reached 80%. So pretty soon what we're gonna see is it's going to call for baseband. Essentially, it's going to try to update the baseband data by, I guess, sending a reauthorization for communication back to the baseband CPU. So here we go, updating baseband data, sending baseband data. And as long as we don't get any error on the next line, then that pretty much confirms that everything was, the baseband CPU was reballed correctly, it was installed correctly, and all the connections are reading properly. So right after this line, which should populate in just a second, it should go to rows, updating rows, updating rows, and yeah, that's it. So once this reboots, we're at 91%, pretty much coming to a wrap. And we're gonna go back to the iDevice tab on the top left. We're gonna click on it, and we're gonna look for IMEI and model firmware. So here we have the device information. So right away, what I like to do is go to Activate Now. So if this works, essentially what you're gonna get a prompt to enter in the Apple ID or iCloud credentials. So under activation, this should pop up in just a moment, prompting you to enter in the credentials. There we are. So that's one indication that baseband is working fine. So we'll cancel that out. And we'll go to View iDevice Details. And I'm just pretty much looking for the modem firmware of the baseband version. So baseband version is going to be over here, indicated as 3.07.00. and of course we have IMEI.